Okay, welcome everyone. We got a really great session here lined up, and I'd like to introduce the session, which is led by my friend Dave Uffer, and he has worked for pretty much every strategic out there, so I think this is an appropriate panel for him to lead. He's now VP of MedTech at Alira. He is a tremendous supporter of LSI and a dear friend of mine, and I'm very thankful that he's here to lead the session today with all these terrific panelists. So I'm just going to kick it over to Dave and let him take it over from here.
Thanks so much, Scott. Appreciate that. And I'm such a big fan of LSI. If we look at the numbers this year, 180 plus presenting companies, over 150 investors, SPACs, strategics, service providers, really thrilled to be here. So thanks for the invite. And without being repetitive, I think we'll just start with Finn and come right back this way down the line with the introductions. I'm Dave Uffer, the Vice President of MedTech for Alira Health. We're a global advisory firm. And as Scott mentioned, it's my 30th year in MedTech, mostly working with large cap MedTech companies in strategy and business development. So I've seen a lot and have a good fortune of knowing our panelists here at various times in my career. Finn?
Yes, so I'm Finn Haley. I'm the Vice President of Corporate Development at Edwards Life Sciences, based here in Orange County in Irvine. Many of you will know our company. We are a leading player in structural heart disease. So transcatheter aortic valve replacement technologies, surgical structural heart technologies, critical care monitoring solutions, and various other patient-centered innovations. So it's great to be here today. I have a background in healthcare for 20 some odd years at Edwards, prior to that in 3M Healthcare, and then I was an investment banker for a number of years covering MedTech.
So hi everybody, I'm Vanessa Abate, Vice President Corporate Development at Zimmer Biomet. Zimmer Biomet based in Warsaw, Indiana. We're a global leader in orthopedic implants and devices. In terms of my background, similar to yours, I spent about 25 years in healthcare, half of which was in healthcare investment banking, and then I moved to the corporate side. So I've been with Zimmer for 2 years, and prior to that, I worked at Quest Diagnostics, running the deal execution at Quest.
Hi everyone, I'm Matthew Shopp. I'm Director of Business Development at Philips, focused on the connected care businesses. Primarily spend a lot of my time on the patient monitoring side of the business, sleep and respiratory, as well as informatics and smart decision making. I've been at Philips for about 6 months. Prior to that, spent about 8 years at Medtronic via the acquisition of Covidien, and spent early time in my career in corporate development at C.R. Bard and some time at Johnson & Johnson as well.
Great. Hey guys, Nick Pachuta. Started my career as a surgeon for 10 years, been in the industry side for the last 20. Last 10 years was at Johnson & Johnson, leading external innovation in orthopedics. I'm currently running strategy and development for a biotech focused on orthopedic infection called Peptologics. I'm also a venture partner at Mountain State Capital.
Hi everyone, I'm Rameen Musabi. I am the Vice President of Patient Monitoring and Digital Health at Baxter International. I don't think I need to introduce Baxter. We kicked off our 90th anniversary today, so I guess a good day to be on the panel. I have responsibility for a new business that we started putting together about 1.5 years ago. Through series of actually inorganic acquisitions. Prior to that, I've been on both sides of strategic and startups, places like Edwards and at CathWorks, and happy to be here.
Great. I'm really thrilled that we have quite a diverse panel here with corporate development, business unit leadership, business unit development, innovations leaders. When we outlined this with Scott, we said we've come out of now 4+ months out of 2020 through what happened with COVID. I just wanted to talk with the panelists a little bit about what 2020 meant to you and how we're looking at 21 and beyond. From an investment standpoint, I looked at some statistics and data. $52 billion invested across healthcare, a banner year beyond any year before, when everybody was worried nobody's going to be able to diligence, the investors are going to get a little slow and sleepy, what's going to happen. even $17 billion of new company investment. So it wasn't just follow-ons and keeping the companies that were already invested there. A little bit different tenor. I want to hear everybody's attitudes when we talk about deals outside of investing. Finn, why don't you start us off a little bit what the attitudes were for 2020 from an M&A and what we're looking and can expect for 2021 and beyond?
Yeah, I'm curious to hear what my colleagues think about this. 2020 felt like a tale of two halves from my perspective. When we were going into there was a ton of optimism coming out of the gate. We felt like it was going to be we had the potential for a record banner year. And then, of course, we had to adjust to the pandemic and what that meant for shutdowns. So there was this period, I felt, where everything just sort of halted. Yep. And this was kind of March, April, and everyone was trying to figure out what we were going to do. And it wasn't so much that I think those of us looking to put capital to work were stopping our work. It was just that processes were delayed. And so banks pulled things back, and investors didn't know exactly what to do, and a lot of it made sense. I think a lot of CEOs were just saying, let's be cautious here. And there were a lot of reasons for it, right? We didn't know what if our valuation models were going to hold on deals we were doing. Suddenly no one knew how to forecast anymore. And we also had this issue around, could we do effective diligence in this new world that we were immediately thrown into?
Right.
If I was shocked by anything last year, it was how quickly we adjusted to that, actually. So when we looked, from our point of view, if you look at the second half of the year, all this activity picked up. And I saw some of the same data you did, David, where if you look at the decrease in deal volume in the first half of the year in M&A, compare it to the increase in the second, it's about the same. Like they basically offset each other. In fact, the year ended up being a really successful year. And the same was true on the venture investing side. The declines were almost all offset in the second half of the year. From my standpoint, it felt like we were busy all year long, though. And yes, there was a disruption in that period, kind of from March till May, but we had a lot of deal flow. We expect that to continue. I would say there's areas of caution, and I'm sure we'll talk about these, valuations being one. I think that there are different perspectives on that, at what time you move in investing in companies, which was a comment Paul Abate made this morning. But we expect to be really busy this year.
Yep.
Vanessa?
Yeah, so similarly for Zimmer Biomet, I think there was a pause that we took. Our business being in orthopedics, much of our business is elective in nature, and so we had to pause and to try to understand the impact on our business of once COVID emerged, and we were very focused on ensuring that we preserved our cash position initially, and once we kind of got through that period. And I would add also that we were kind of prioritizing activities. So we thought about the fact that we wanted to kind of get some transactions done, but maybe we had less capital to put to work. Mm-hmm. So we looked at our pipeline and kind of reprioritized things. But I agree with Finn in terms of, the pause was somewhat brief. It was a 1 to 2 month pause, and then things picked up again. So we ended up being pretty active. We got 4 acquisitions closed and 1 partnership. So it was a successful year. I look back and think, we got some good transactions accomplished. And, we didn't spend as much as we thought we were going to spend. But coming into this year, we feel like we'll have more capital to deploy. And our strategy has been very consistent in terms of being focused on tuck-in acquisitions, primarily in our core and adjacent markets. And so we're going to continue to focus that way, really trying to fill product gaps, bringing new innovation and technology into the company and into our business lines. And, very much aimed at accelerating our growth rate and driving innovation. So.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned tuck-ins. It reminds me of a statement that Jeff Martha made a few months ago from Medtronic, saying that there were some great value plays out there last year, and they were really looking at more transformational. That's where they were geared, and he felt they missed a lot of opportunities for tuck-ins. Not that they're low value, because they, as Finn was alluding to, some of them were highly valued, but they were just fit seamlessly in with the businesses. Matt Phillips, in your actual business unit, made a massive multi-billion-dollar acquisition. What's the attitude toward tuck-ins that are not transformational, and a lot of the companies here that would fit seamlessly into other companies?
Sure. 2020 was certainly an interesting year in MedTech, given that a lot of businesses with elective procedures and depending on where they focused saw such a lull. But there were a lot of businesses in respiratory and patient monitoring especially that boomed. So a lot of the focus was how do we meet the massive increase in demand and still do acquisitions and further our strategy. And after that initial lull period, a lot of the time, we realized we can continue to grow the business and still have resources to do both transformational and tuck-in acquisitions. So it was a brief period, I think May through July was mentioned, where we had to level set of what is the new normal? What do we have to work with resource-wise? Monetarily, what do we have to work with? And then look at and start charting the path forward based on how COVID has changed the strategy that we might have been going after. So, as you look at it, there are transformational opportunities with COVID, procedures and monitoring being pushed further out of the hospital to free up space that was needed. And as we look to 21, we're still working on digesting the transformational opportunities that we've executed on, and looking to build around those, but certainly not ruling out transformational at all.
Thanks, Matt. I almost look at it like a lot of the companies got a mulligan in the golf term on earnings last year. I mean, who could expect the same earnings with the crisis that hit, and that, of course, it changed things like electives that I think hit Zimmer a little bit harder, and so many of your procedures are based on electives. So there wasn't the pressure on earnings, but there's always the issue of dilution and accretion and how it's going to affect earnings when we look at M&A. You were the beneficiary the past few years of having a very aggressive Baxter when it came to acquisitions, and your business unit was supported with a few acquisitions. Tell me about what you're projecting for the future and attitudes from the corporation. Rameen, don't bring us anything that's dilutive, or look, anything that's going to bring value and drive us for the future.
Yeah, I mean, somehow the quiet time didn't arrive to Chicago. So, we didn't have that last year. And we were in the middle of a deal and, talk about doing two integrations in the middle of pandemic. We had to do the due diligence and then you have to integrate it. So I think the disruptive thing from last year that is impacting our thinking right now is honestly not valuation. It's the fact that some of the business models that were maybe more effective prior to pandemics are not really as effective. Being in the hospital all the time, that opened up the door to a whole lot of other things that you would normally not get that attention. Thinking about remote patient monitoring, telehealth, digital health. I think as we are going to through 2021, this is probably one of the most active years I've been involved in, interacting with inorganic things, and I think it's driven by two things. One, there's a better appetite for certain things. I don't know if we call it upside of COVID, but at least COVID has forced everybody to rethink some things that we were not giving them an opportunity before. But also, there's a window that you can take advantage of certain things, and I think that's what we are really thinking about. You always try to find things that are non-dilutive, but I think if you have the right strategic alignment, that is probably a secondary way of thinking about it. We were the beneficiary of having thought about certain things, and we moved on them before pandemic happened, and we stayed with them. There were a lot of debate on, was that the right valuation or not, but we stayed with it and it paid off. I mean, I'm glad with everything that we stayed with. I'm not really happy about doing integration during pandemic, but you got to do what you got to do.
You made it work. While we can talk about M&A all day long, I think some people lose sight of the fact that there's so many ways to integrate with a large strategic. Nick, coming from the innovation side, tell me about how you would access companies early on and what types of structures you've seen to actually say, we don't have to wait till you're M&A ready, there's so many ways to work with a company like J&J or any of the others that have strong R&D or clinical departments, whatever.
Well, it sort of ties back into your last two comments about tuck-ins and need for growth deals, and accretive or dilutive. As we went last year from suits to sweats to suits again, and we all enjoy being back in suits, right? But the deal flow maybe took a temporary slowdown, but it certainly accelerated again. And I see so many startups now, and it's certainly accelerating. But I want to think about the paradox of what we talked about. The CEO that gets on a podium like this and says, "I'm only interested in accretive deals. I can't take any R&D budget expense. So guys, you got to find me things that are going to drive our growth, right?" And then he goes to a meeting in the afternoon and says, "How did we miss that deal?" Right? Well, that's how you miss that deal, right? If you get on the podium and say, "We're only looking for accretive and for other strategics," and you guys, it's great that you're doing so many earlier stage partnerships, and that's what I did for the last 10 years, right? Whether you're just having a conversation with a pre-revenue company or an earlier stage company, sending them into incubators. Some companies have incubators, some don't, strategics or not. Developmental collaborations, equity investment. And you don't have to spend your time getting caught up in, do we need a ROFR? Do we have hard commercial rights? Do we have a structured deal? Just, why do deals get done? Deals get done between people who know people. And the earlier you have that relationship and the earlier you build that, no matter what vehicle you're using to build that relationship, the relationship is what gets that deal done. So whether it's formal or informal, there are multiple ways to partner, but you have to take on a little bit of risk. It's not really a lot of risk. Most of what it takes to partner with early stage companies compared to the balance sheets of companies here, it's couch cushion dollars, right? And I don't want to downplay the amount, but the ability to partner is there for those that are willing to do it, and those are the ones that don't have a CEO at the end of the day saying, "How did we miss that deal?"
Yeah, and I think you're so right. We tend to spend a lot of time thinking about, what's the IP portfolio pattern look like, what's the value. But the one thing that the startups have, and having lived it back and forth, between large and startup, is the agility. And that has such a huge value for larger strategics because no matter how good you are, in a large setting, speed has a different, barriers into it. So if you find a way to highlight that in the right setting, that is always valued. And that usually, as you mentioned, leads into kind of meaningful relationship. Once you get to know someone, you get to trust the product, you get to trust the value of what you're willing to pay for. So obviously an exit is great, but there are many other ways to sell the value of what you have, especially with disruptive innovation. I think that's definitely a key thing to look for.
Great. So Nick, you mentioned get to know the people, but we've got, again, such a diverse, we've got corporate, we've got business unit, we've got business unit, business development, and then we've got operators of the business unit. I had a CEO yell at me as I tried to talk with him a few times and said, "Dave, you're the last person I'm going to talk to. I do want to talk to you, but I'm going to the business unit to work with the GM and the VPs of marketing that want my technology, and then they're going to knock on your door." And it goes up the channel and down the channel at times. Matt, tell me about the experience where when you want to see companies, how you want to integrate with them, and when you want them going down to the business operators.
Sure, and it certainly is important, as Nick was saying, when you build that relationship early and start to understand what is the target, or what is the potential partner looking at, what's their path forward, what are their milestones that they're looking to hit, and understanding how they're operating as a company so we can start to put together a plan to work with them early on, or know when is the appropriate time for us to start to work with them. If a company's planning on not selling until they go commercial and they drive value that way, it's good to know and stay in touch. At Philips, what I've found over the last 6 months, we have a very active and engaged venture team that we partner with, and as well as working with our corporate M&A and our strategy leads within the business. So a lot of my role in business development is to help to align who we're connecting the team with and making sure that understanding where the startup or the earlier stage company wants to go, what stage they're at, how can we work together, and who within the Philips organization is best suited for that early relationship. You know, if it's a joint development or something early on, you know, working with someone deeper in the business to develop that and keeping some of the others aware of the plan for down the road and in the future. If it's something where it's acquisition ready and they're ready to start a process, you know, it kind of starts at the other end with the business being more informed, but on the corporate side, a heavier level of involvement. And it's really a sliding scale, and the important thing is to keep everyone on that scale a part of the process throughout the whole time, to know when each person on that scale should be the lead and when someone should just be more informed and in learning mode.
So, in corporate development, so my last role at Medtronic was in the business unit for business development. They wanted things socialized pretty far in advance to see that it was on your strat plan. This was a target, it's not going to be actionable this year, maybe even minimally 9 to 12 months out. And typically it was being investigated for a few years. Didn't like a surprise knock on the door, can we have a check for this?
Right.
Finn, you're laughing. Does that happen often? And do you look at a deal and say, this is good value, it makes a lot of strategic sense, or
Yeah.
well, this just came up, guys?
Well, I think, you know, sitting in this role, and I'm imagining, you know, most of us on the corporate side have some kind of committee that reviews these deals when you bring it forward, an investment committee, an M&A committee. I'm going to say this wasn't at Edwards, but I've been at companies where you have this huge strategic deal you bring forward, and it's a complete surprise to management, but you want a bunch of money to do it, right? It's a tough position to be in. It also begs the question, if this was so strategic and all this capital, why are we just hearing about it? I would say, to echo what you all said earlier, our view, you know, I get asked all the time, when's the right time to approach us to talk to us? Early. Early is the default answer. You know, at Edwards, we have lots of ways that we can work with you beyond just doing acquisitions. You can make minority investments. You can think of all sorts of structured deals, partnership things. These are all tools in the toolkit, but it is helpful. It is very, very helpful to get to know our teams, both in the businesses and the corporate development teams, because we all spend a lot of time socializing new technologies. And it's partly the nature of the businesses that we play in, being cardiovascular. A lot of this is new technology. There aren't as many, you know, $2 billion companies that sneak up on you in our space. This is a lot of emerging technology. So it's important to start having those conversations early. And I would say, when you go to have those conversations, there are things that we probably care more about than other things. You mentioned earnings. Well, I mean, the companies I deal with a lot of times don't have earnings to talk about. So what are we focused on? How carefully you've thought about the patient opportunity. Can you get to a granular level talking about your TAMs and why this is impactful for patients and the clinical workflow? That's the world we live in on the corporate side, and we care a lot about those things. So people that can come in and speak to that in a convincing way immediately are somewhat enamored. We're enamored with them because that's the way we talk inside of Edwards. But the structuring piece of it, there's a great deal of flexibility behind. And I think that you know, we're willing to entertain different ways of working together, but what we really like to do is start that relationship very early so we can take our management on that journey and watch as you progress through the clinical development pathway and hit some of those milestones you mentioned. Then we can start feeling more and more conviction, and then of course you can have the maybe the potential for the exit you'd like. So, you know, that's the way we like to do it, at least.
Okay.
Yeah, no, quick comment. I think two things. One, you know, as we do the dance on deals, no matter which side of the table we're on, right? You know, you have your meeting at JP Morgan or the Emerging MedTech Summit, and then there's the non-confidential call, then there's the CDA, then there's the confidential meeting, and now you've got 7 other people from the various teams on that call. And then after that call, you know, if you're not interested, you know, that email that goes out that says, it's not on strategy, sorry. I wish we would all never do that again, right? I mean, you shouldn't have been through the first 4 or 5 phone calls and involved that whole team if it really wasn't on strategy. The other thing, though, is the people that create and own that strategy, that's where I see the best deals get done, right? It's not, the meeting at JP Morgan, they met the CEO, and somehow the CEO shoots it down the chain saying, we should look at this deal, right? Those always go great when it comes through the channel, right? But the ones where, the directors and the VPs and the presidents of those operating companies say, we know our landscape. These are the 1 or 2 that we really want. Sure. And we want to engage, we want to develop, we want to commercialize and integrate this into our portfolio. Those deals are really successful. Yeah. The ones that sort of come top down without business buy-in, they might smell good for the first few years, but they don't smell so good 4 or 5 years later. So they just, a little perspective from both sides of the table.
Yep. That's a great point. You were nodding your head.
Yeah, I mean, it's, I think Finn mentioned, knowing what you're trying to, do is really important. I mean, talking about, you mentioned TAM, and I think, just bringing the story of why this helps. We have this saying that says it's much better to have a simple solution to a known problem than a great solution to an unknown problem. Searching for a problem doesn't really help. So, you can reach out to whoever you want to reach out, and you should, get to know people. But people who make the decision, people who have to make the case for going outside and doing something it's not usually top down. It's usually, bottom up. It's a director of marketing who's passionate about growing the portfolio, or is an R&D person who will have an appetite for the right kind of technology that comes. And I think those are the meaningful things. I'm with you. I wish we didn't do. We try really hard to be upfront and not do the 7 rounds of CDAs, because I've been on the startup side, and it takes so much energy, and it's such a disappointment when you think you've done a good job and it doesn't go well. But this goes back to getting to know people early in the career, because once you build that relationship, it's much easier to ask the question, do you think this is going to work out anywhere? Does this fit? Because people change their strategy sometimes to fit things, Sure. So, I think it is very true, but that early thing cannot be emphasized hard enough. And I just say, there's an alumni of this platform from 3 years ago that we acquired last year. And I'm in a different world. I listened to them, and I'm like, whoa, this thing is so interesting. And it was like one of the first things that we did, when I got to the role. I'm like, where are those people? Let's LinkedIn and find them and go back to them. So there's always opportunities.
Look, I also always encourage our clients to reach out to the unusual suspects too, because you don't know what every corporate and every business unit's strategy is going to be from year to year. And they do change, sometimes all too often. Matt, I think you've seen that too many times. But you don't know what might not be tuck-in. It could be adjacency or even white space considerations. So I always implore the companies to have as many dialogues and introductions as they can. And again, early on. Since this is an investor conference, I want to change up just a little bit. I think everybody that I shake hands with here isn't like this. It's more like that, because they're looking for a check, and they're here to seek investors. Gwen Watanabe, who was corporate development of Teleflex, was to be on this panel, but in between the time she signed up for it, she took a role in robotics, so she'll be on a robotics panel tomorrow from Smith & Nephew. But she would always ask me, Dave, are we the largest company that doesn't deploy capital in venture investing? And I know everybody here at some degree does. Tell me about the intent and the purpose, at least at Philips. I know you said that you're 6 months in and very pleasantly surprised to see how aggressive they've been.
Yeah, and at least at Philips, we have our own venture team that goes out and explores new areas that may be interesting to Philips in the future, and or areas that they're just looking to learn more and invest in. And then there's also the other side of it of sitting within a business. We also do business-focused and business-sponsored venture investing. So there's really those two avenues that Philips takes in looking at investing in companies. When it's when we're looking to make an investment, a lot of that does come out through early discussions with the company, where we're learning about their timeline, we're learning about what they're looking for down the road. they're learning about what we're looking for, what risks want to be retired before we would acquire. Perhaps they're looking to help to move to an acquisition structure that's more upfront rather than a milestone based, and a venture round where we can see then some of those risks retired in an acquisition down the road for more focused of an upfront structure, might make sense for them. But it's really been interesting at Philips seeing the venture focused and the business focused investment in companies out there.
Vanessa, there's a lot of orthopedic companies here. Tell us about Zimmer's perspective on investing.
Sure. So we don't have a venture fund capability currently, but we are in the process of evaluating and potentially putting one in place, possibly later this year, early next. And we do think that it requires, a dedicated team to focus on it. And, you need to approach it not on an ad hoc basis, but more in terms of a portfolio approach. And it needs to, the investments that you make need to be aligned with your strategy and make sense from that standpoint. So, but we are looking at it pretty seriously, putting something in place. I'll say that, from an acquisition standpoint, we generally like to acquire companies that are at commercial stage or near commercial stage, because we do have some sensitivity to dilution, and we do look for M&A to kind of drive top line, near-term top line growth. For companies that have interesting technologies or developing products that we think would be a great fit with our channel, we will do partnerships, strategic partnerships, and a common approach for us to take is to do a co-development, a funding of a product development, as well as sort of an exclusive distribution and exclusive rights to IP. And in conjunction with that, we would look to, kind of add a ROFIN or a ROFO or ROFR, whatever you want to call it. So generally speaking, that's how we approach, earlier stage companies as a partnership approach. And that seems to work well for us, and we've done a few recently.
So there's so many vehicles to engage. Aside from just venture investing, Nick, a little bit more from you on how to engage outside of just minority equity investing, and then how you look at rights. One of the things that a lot of the companies that come to us and ask for guidance is, what do we do about rights when somebody asks for that? At least when I would invest, I never did that at Medtronic, asked for hard rights. I just wanted to have board seat and observation rights and keep information flow as best we could, so we knew when to pull the trigger, whether it was preemptive or at auction.
Yeah, I doubt that most startups are looking for a minority investment, but giving away hard rights or a right of first refusal, that can, unless the check is big enough, right? If you're going to exclusively lock somebody up, then you're going to write a bigger check, and to write that check, the investment committee levels go a couple levels up, and the amount of pre-work that has to be done to do those kind of deals are difficult or more difficult. If the point is building relationships to see it early so that you can make the deal when you think it's the right inflection point, I don't think you need to get so caught up in the hard rights and commercial terms and structured deals. If you're there at the table, and in pharma, there's multiple strategics could be in the same equity round with a pharma target. However, in MedTech, how many times do you see in the cap table multiple strategics, right? That's rare. It's typically one. So whether you're in for a small amount or you've got a ROFR, ROFIN, or to push for those harder rights and build that structured deal and have to do all the diligence required sometimes, I think it's unnecessary. I think to use some of those vehicles, whether you're using balance sheet or some development dollars, to build that relationship early, I don't think you need to overthink the rights you need. If you're if you're a board observer, you're going to see what you want to see when you want to see it.
Mm-hmm.
Finn, you're nodding there. A little bit of thoughts?
Yeah, no, I generally agree with it. I don't want to put myself in the position of arguing against something that sometimes I may ask for, but I think that's generally true. I think in most cases, our job is to get to the company earlier and establish that relationship to a degree where you are going to be the first call they make. We approach it that way at Edwards. We really value those relationships. I think that, if you have observation rights, generally speaking, we're going to know what we know to get that level of conviction we know to do something more serious. Are there times where, we may ask for them or get them? Yeah, sure. I mean, in history that does happen. But generally speaking, we, particularly on the minority investment side, we want observation rights. We want to know what's going on. That's what's important to us. As you explore other structures, of course, if we're doing something that's more structured or like, looking at, a popular structure of build to buys, which people talk a lot about, totally different scenario, right? We're talking about real complexity. But in general, I think that holds true for us as well.
Nick, you mentioned if you're going to write a big enough check, and I know a lot of times at Edwards you have to because of I mean, when you're in the markets that you're in, these take significant investment. We're not talking $2-3 million investments. What about consolidation? I mean, if you get over 20%, now you get to consolidate. Do you say by no means will we look at that, or how do you deal with that?
We spend probably, all companies in our spot probably spend too much time thinking about financial accounting and consolidation.
Yeah.
I think that is a number. I would be disingenuous to say that no one's looking at consolidation accounting. They are. But there are different ways to skin the cat on that. I mean, there are, just taking minority position and letting that strategy take care of itself, or there are things you can do around voting, non-voting shares, all sorts of things that people do to work with that. So it's definitely something we talk about. It's definitely something that's an issue, but it shouldn't. There's something wrong if accounting questions are dictating how you progress with strategic investments, and we don't let that happen.
Rameen, I know Joe and Dennis have restructured the way Ventures operates, the way it's staffed, and how they're going to deploy capital. Really important to see them being aggressive again. A little bit about the stance from Baxter.
Sure. I mean, as since Joe came to Baxter about 5 years ago, he's been on this journey of trying to change some of the things that we are doing. And, we, for the past 24 months, I think we've been very well positioned to do that. I'm very encouraged by our venture group's actually willingness to look at any possibilities. As we think about partnerships, we look at any possibilities. If you have a good solution that helps and sustain lives, we are willing to listen to it. I think it's important that there's a good alignment between what you're asking for and what you can offer. Sometimes it's a little bit of, you're asking for something that is not proportionally aligned to the value that you can bring to the table at that stage of the company. We've made a series of early stage investments, minority investment. I'm with what you said. I mean, honestly, even if you don't have an observer right, if you want to learn about something, you'll find a way to learn. So, I think, not to, offend anybody who sits on the board as an observer, but I think that is overhyped, because if you're on the startup side, there's also, I'm sure there are people here not going to nod, but how you also hold back what you don't want your observers to know. So, so just, it's all about finding the way to do the right partnership. And I think one thing, and not to do a plug for you, David, here, but finding people who've been around a long time to advise you when you're on the startup side is actually helpful, because there are two things in play. One, you need to understand the state of mind of leadership of a company. They usually have a pattern of thinking, but also understanding the strategy of the company, because if you can make your pitch fitting to what they need, and I think that's where folks like you who've been around for a long time can say, look, listen to what a public company says. There's more than what you want to say that you will say in a public company. That alignment, I mean, what we're looking from a venture perspective is things that will fit what Baxter wants to do from a long-term perspective, and we can be a long-term partner. We will, you can have an early exit if it is ready, and if it's not, we are willing to be in, for long-term and get you where you want to go, because ultimately that return is there.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for the effort. I tried to give you Softball pitch to plug the
There you go.
robotics
There you go.
panel tomorrow, but you didn't take on it, so thanks for that one. A little bit on partnering in different ways. I had a client that was a major Japanese company, and they were having difficulty getting the speed of deals through because of the organization. Everything had to go back to headquarters in Tokyo. So they took a strategy of going into distribution that would then socialize it very strongly. The company could see the performance. It was a lot of that strategy, not just the de-risk on the commercial side, but of course that's one of the strong strategies that will help you, A, stay close to the company, see the performance, de-risk, but it was also a way for them to get it through corporate a little bit easier. Intentions for taking products in companies through distribution. J&J has many platforms. What was the experience there?
Yeah, I mean, J&J and DePuy Synthes particularly, did a number of distribution deals, and it's a way to sort of date before you get married, right? And I think, you hear the trend in the last year or two about we want to see companies get clinical and commercial proof of concept, and we want to see them get some momentum. I hate that conversation with startups saying, okay, now we weren't planning to commercialize, but now we have to go raise that round, and our valuation's going to go up, and we're going to get diluted, so we can get $10 million in sales. I would much rather see that strategic partnership as you start that dating relationship, you can build distribution, and hopefully it works out. I'd rather see more of those than forcing so many startups to do that, say C round, and build that commercial momentum. If you want it, I would say I would encourage strategics to build those partnerships around distribution early, and not force so many startups to have to build that commercial team that they're just going to disassemble a few years later when they do a definitive relationship.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And we have done a lot of exclusive and non-exclusive distribution arrangements. And it's a nice way for us to, get comfortable and confident about our ability to, make a great, achieve a great market opportunity with the product or technology, get to know the team, and, have that much more confidence when we are ready to pull the trigger. I just find that in this market, though, which is very frothy, that we're in a very, hot M&A market, that a lot of the targets are like, well, we're talking to these other guys and they want to buy the whole company, so you get that story a lot. But we like to kind of dabble first, if we can.
So how early would you go? Would you be the first commercial offering of a technology, or would you like to see it piloted in a certain region, and then you'll?
No, we'll be the first, and we'll definitely be the one to kind of, like I said earlier, actually fund development of the product, maybe finalize development of the product if it needs that, or just be the first to exclusive distribution in the market. So.
You said exclusive and non-exclusive.
We prefer
Is that by
exclusive.
region? If you were non-exclusive?
No, it would be, either globally or within the, our preference is global exclusive.
Yeah, but I mean, successful distribution is like exclusive dating. You got to decide whether you really want to enter that or not, because if you want to go into a distribution that you wanted to lead somewhere, it's hard to want to do that and say, I want to talk to everybody else. I think, at least my experience is that, we enter that if we really have an intent to, be a long-term partner, because there's a lot of relationship you have to build. And you got to remember that from a strategic perspective, that's their brand in front of the customers. Mm-hmm. So you can't just walk away from that, 6 months into it and go back to your customer and say, okay, we were just kidding. So I think it is a good vehicle, but it's one that on the startup side, you have to think about it carefully, because if you go into it, you tend the risk of pushing away other strategics. One thing I would also say is that the world that you're in, you got to really think about how well can you build a commercial team that would compete, against the large companies that are there. That's another big facet. There are elements of MedTech that still has a lot of room to bring in, especially disruptive products that they are really disruptive. But if you want to be in these established markets, it's really hard, I'll just pick on us. If you want to be like in anything that has to do with acute setting, you really don't want to build a sales team and then pitch that back to us, because we have that sales team already.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, think about use an example, the trauma device market, right? There are two companies that own most of the share there. So if you're an innovative trauma company, and one of the big strategics says, we'd like to see you get out and get some sales first at these major university hospitals. How are you you're not gonna get on the shelf, right? So I think it's sometimes unfair to say, we'd like to see you get clinical and commercial proof of concept, even though 2 or 3 players have the whole market locked up and you really don't have a chance.
Absolutely. I think we've got about 5 minutes left in the session. I know Scott has some mics around. We want to make this interactive. We've got, I think I counted over 100 years of collective deal-making experience here on this panel. So whether it's their respective companies, the history of their companies, or I think BizDev is a small world. They know all of their counterparts. Just any questions from the audience? Raise a hand and we'll get a mic over to you. Right behind you, Scott. Right behind you.
Hi, Brian Hakeem from MedTech X. You were speaking about rights when you're investing. On the flip side of it, if a company has licensed out rights for a particular geography, emerging markets or China or India, how do you look at that when you are going to consider acquisition? And more importantly, what should the companies have in place? What should they have done with their licensee to facilitate your interest?
I'll tell you, because we are dealing with one, I'm doing an integration that has a piece like that. And I'll give you the answer from both sides. When we look at it, we tend to try to figure out if you need to unbind it, how difficult would that be, and who are that players, If you're on the startup side, you got to think about the history of whoever you're outsourcing and your potential targets. There's usually some sort of history globally. This tends to happen a lot with startups outside of US. People tend to not really care about where they're outsourcing because they just want to get the revenue. What I would say is that the one clause you want to leave in there is how do you terminate? It's much easier to have a pay for termination clause in there because the strategic is willing to pay that. But when it's a mutual agreement, that tends to be very sticky when the two parties don't have good relationships.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a strategic, as Vanessa said, you'd rather just have worldwide rights and not have to worry about it. If you have given away rights, and I advise all startup companies, ask that question, can we unravel this easily and inexpensively if we really want a strategic exit later? If you haven't asked that question and you give something away, you could have killed your opportunity potentially for a bigger definitive strategic deal.
Agreed.
Yeah.
See it the same way. And we've run into it. I mean, in my past, I've approached companies and they have clauses that are really, really tough to unravel, and it becomes a big issue. So it's something to spend time thinking about.
Yeah, Matt, I know, for example, you did a deal with a company that had 14 distribution agreements, but he was smart enough to make a time unwind on that, and they were within 3 months, most of them were within 3 months of the deal. So just be very cognizant of what the out clause is and how somebody can unwind it.
It definitely affects NPV of the deal potentially when, because these can all add up, these termination payments, and it could be a big chunky one-time expense that you have to take. And while you can kind of take that out of GAAP, it's real cash. So it does affect your NPV.
For instance, Brian, you mentioned China. Sometimes the companies, while they're global, they might not, in that particular business, have a channel, and it might be appreciated that they actually can maintain that relationship and still have sales in that region if they don't have an organization or they're not prepared for that transfer, and maybe it's a year unwind on that. We had one more over here.
Yeah. So how do you think about deals where another strategic has made an earlier stage investment? Does that make it attractive or does that make it tainted?
I'll jump on that one. I think it adds credibility. I mean, I think most startups would love to have a strategic to add credibility, because if you don't have hard rights, then it adds that credibility, helps them raise money, right? And you get that first look opportunity, sort of no matter what real relationship you have with them, as long as you have some. So I think it makes total sense.
Agreed. I see it the same way. When I look at the history of venture capital investment I've done here in the past, it's not uncommon at all that there'll be another strategic in the mix, or multiple strategics in the mix. And yeah, in some ways it lends credibility. Of course, you know, if anything, in some ways it pushes us a little bit to, again, find ways to be better at forming relationships, again, because you want to be the first call. That's what we want to do. And so I don't see it as a deterrent.
I had an example where I was one of 5 strategics invested in a company, and the 6th company acquired it. It wasn't even one of them. So never worry about having a strategic and multiples in there. One of my invested companies said, we want Baxter to come in on this round. You are the first in line. Is it okay? And I said, I want a strong syndicate. I want good partners, and we co-invested. So
I'd still like to be the first call, though. I mean, get early, and get in early. Talk to us early. If there's a way for us to be the only strategic, I'd take it.
Yeah, but I mean, large strategics also have really smart people in their BD and corporate development. So if there's one has already invested, that tells you that somebody, you know, did some level of diligence and they thought it's a good idea. That gives you not just the credibility, but also, you know, it gives you that kind of confidence that, okay, you know, somebody from different lens looked at it. You know, it's great if you can get more of them, you know, but it doesn't stop. If you're the right solution, you know, there's a way to get around all of those, and it's always good when there are others who have invested and you do the exit.
Well, 50 minutes goes quick, so I got to thank all the panelists. I really appreciate the time and all the insights, and I know that they're all going to be here for some time throughout the week, so they're very approachable. Come on up and say hello. Thank you.
Thanks, David.